Hello everyone and welcome to Advanced Exercise Physiology for Sport. Once again, I'm Professor Mark Baines with Concordia University in Irvine, and this is our final week for the course, covering information on the environment, how it relates to exercise, and ergogenic aids. And before we get into that, a few points from our week previous. A few things to make sure we have clarified. Ongoing training with children, or training youth, anyone 17 years and younger, generally speaking. And there's some ranges in there considering who's referred to as a child. But generally speaking, 17 years and under is what we're typically thinking of for children. And that said, the greatest concern with young children and training them is the potential of breaking or causing damage to the epiphyseal plate or growth plate, slippage of that plate, which really relates to the humerus or the femur, whereby it would take a blunt force trauma to be any real significant issue, right? A really significant trauma for that to occur. And it's rarely going to happen from someone lifting weights, unless someone's going to get that happening. If someone's going to be lifting some crazy amount of weight, they should never even consider lifting in the first place. It's actually not the weights that's likely to cause issues with the epiphyseal plate slippage so much as impact. Through accidents or injury or falling out of a tree or getting hit by a car or some major hit in football or something like that for a young kid. Those are possibilities that are even still rare. That said, the greater concerns for children really are, even though those are concerns, if they don't get surgery, if they ever break the epiphyseal plate, they would affect the growth of that particular bone, that specific bone, not the whole body. The greater concerns for training young kids is the volume of training. Oftentimes we treat children like they're adults, or more importantly, we treat the young athletic kids like they're elite Olympic athletes. And we give them far too many sets. We have far too much length of work periods, way too much intensity expectation for too many sets, and rest periods are often very short. It doesn't really make a lot of sense for any athlete, let alone a young kid. Really, the volume of training should be questioned for any athlete when, number one, when motor control is lost. As soon as the nervous system response creates an issue with the ability to produce proper joint actions, proper movement skill, that starts to wane or decline during a given set or with each successive set, there's absolutely zero reason, in the professional opinion of this professor, to ever pursue any more sets. We've done it all along throughout many of our careers, and a lot of our coaches did it. I was always one of the fortunate ones. Throughout all my high school career, when it came to sports beyond track and field, when it came to football and basketball, I was the one who was always finishing first or right there, or maybe got beat by someone once in a while, but I was lucky from the standpoint of being the one who was always in the front, of finishing each interval before everybody else did. The longer we went, the more intervals we had, the more I got in front of everybody else, and everybody else fall behind. And of course, the coach would get everybody back on the line. We'd go again. Made no sense at all. Everyone else should have gone home, and that coach should let me keep running, or me and the one or two other students or other athletes that were still able to keep up with that level of volume of training. That made sense for everybody else, not for the ones who kept falling further and further behind. There's no reason to be training like that. Volume of training needs to be carefully watched, and for any level, youth or otherwise, if performance starts to wane, speed lowers, which means movement skill already went down. You see anything that shows a decline in performance, if you don't think it's a question of effort, if you're pretty darn sure it has to do with actual performance capability, there's absolutely zero reason physiologically to go any farther than that. And we don't need to worry about psychological benefits to young kids for like early high school or before that to beat the heck out of them like we do with kids that are trying to train for being state champs or something like that. Let alone collegiate type athletes, where they're no longer referred to as youths anyway. Lifting weights in general, yes, a child can lift weights if they have the movement skill to be able to handle that particular movement, let alone can they do it with a little bit of load. Can they handle that load and move fluidly, well, biomechanically correct? If they can do it, they can lift it. Simple as that. How many they do? Well, we start very, very low, one set, low load, longer duration, short rest if they're going to go a second set at the very most, but always start with any human being, one set, and figure out if they can even do it in the first place, right? That said, women, the greatest concern is the female triad, concern for bone mineral loss, low energy, and of course menstrual dysfunction. And with bone mineral loss, bone density issues, certainly not getting proper nutrients in the diet will play a big role with this, particularly carbs and protein. Carbs and protein. If you don't get proper carbohydrate, protein can't do its job. That's rarely talked about, but it needs to be very much understood. Protein cannot do its job, cannot be metabolized properly if carbohydrate is not present within the system. So that's why we have to have good carbohydrate and more carbohydrate than protein for any athlete. There's just no reasonable expectation of more protein than fat. There just isn't. That said, for as far as bone mineral loss. Certainly could take mineral supplements, but more importantly is getting proper protein in the diet, sure, and getting good carbohydrate. And when it comes to training, which is your job as a coach, is to make sure you have actual exercises that are loading through the bone, which means walking, running, jumping, squatting, deadlifting, overhead pressing. I think it's like a push type exercise that loads through the spine, like an axial or structural loaded exercise. It's going to help build bone density. Normal motion on the ground does that, and anything where you're loading and you're pressing something over your head, or things on your back and you're pressing up and down, any of those things. Clearly, you would start with a bodyweight squat or a lunge before you'd ever load it. You would start with just being able to lift proper motion before you actually have a weight in your hand, do an overhead press. You'd walk before you ran, and basically run before you try to go jumping successively. But generally speaking, those are progressions. And that said, that's how you're best going to build bone density, is loading through the bone, not lifting like arm curls, knee extensions, that kind of thing. You're loading across the bone. Those don't count. Pulling exercises, those don't count toward bone density increase either. Still good exercises, but not for bone density. Okay. Low energy, well, it comes back to carbohydrate again, particularly carbohydrate, secondarily fat. For the endurance type exercise, or any exercises that are engaging for longer periods, the greater and greater need there is for more predominant fat usage in the diet, not just carbohydrate. But carbohydrate still needs to be very, very high regardless of it. At length of training, anybody below 50% carbohydrate makes no sense at all for someone engaging in significant periods of higher intensity exercise. Okay, and there's variations within that. You should always consult a dietitian if you want to really get it nailed, but that's a good general idea. A lot of women, unfortunately, men too, but women predominantly so because of social issues in particular with body image, body dysmorphia, with this expectation that somehow you have to look a certain way. Oftentimes, the first thing that every human being, any human being, it's mostly women, unfortunately, will go to when they don't like their bodies, generally speaking, and they want to take drastic action, the first thing is not eating, which makes no sense. I want my car to run better, so let's not give it some gas. Makes no sense. But in the minds of those who have those issues, it does make sense because they can see the weight coming off. So consequently, it does make sense. Yeah, they may not feel as good. They can't perform as well, but they see the weight coming off, and that's their predominant goal. You've got to really watch for that, have a lot of discussions with your athletes, maybe personally, independently, and where possible, getting them help from a psychologist. If they're under 18, then just talking to the parents. The parents take care of the psychologist and whatnot there. You just talk with them little bits here and there. Let the parents handle the rest of it. 18 years and older, then you got to actually get a psychologist or someone to help you to help give them better ideas of how to help themselves pass these eating disorder issues. Both, I'd say, psychologist and a dietitian, both. Okay. Menstrual dysfunction. Well, if they're not eating right and they're not training properly and or both, they're going to have menstrual dysfunction. You've got to be careful of significantly high intensities, can really throw off the menstrual cycle for women. And we've got to be careful of that potential problem. And more specifically, if we engage the proper activity level intensity-wise, we won't have that issue. Honestly, motor control issues and speed and performance, whatnot, you're going to see that wane long before you see the downside of menstrual function issues for women. If they're performing well and getting stronger and building more and more, you're probably not going to see menstrual function issues. If they're actually every set always seeing the same or better, you're probably not going to see that. That's hypothetical and that's generally speaking, but that said, you got to take a close look at that and have obviously more conversations. It's easier with a female coach and a female athlete. If that's an issue for you and you're a male coach and you have female athletes, probably best if you have a female assistant or someone else you can trust that you can actually, that's acceptable by the school or wherever you work, to be consulting with your females when it comes to some of these issues, because they probably have a hard time disclosing their challenges or concerns with you as a male coach. Something to think about. It wasn't mentioned significantly because it's more towards biomechanics than it is necessarily exercise physiology, but still a major point, I want to make sure we brought it up, is the Q angle, the angle downward from the hip toward the knee. Women typically have wider pelvis, wider hips than men for obvious reasons, for childbearing reasons in the future, right? And of course, with more children, those hips get wider because it's just simple fact what has to happen with giving birth to children. That said, because of that angle, there's greater concern about knee-related and ankle-related issues, a little on back and hip-related issues. Knee is usually the first thing where problems start to happen. First place was knee pain and whatnot. Back pain often goes with that as well, but knee pain usually comes first. Maybe more ankle turns, any of the above. The predominant need is to work on the proper hip action. Typically, we're talking about proper hip flexion and extension. More importantly, toward extension, when you push off, when you run, when you jump, the extension component's the biggest part. Have to have proper mobility into flexion, but the extension strength capability and mobility is crucial. That said, certainly strengthening knee extension in particular, not so much knee flexion, unless you think they have some issue with tightness in quadricep muscles, in which case you worry about the flexion of the knee as far as isolating that activity. Otherwise, we're talking knee extension when it comes to normal motion and possibly adding that in with strength training. And of course, ankle mobility, more than ankle strengthening, like loading up your ankles for calf raises and whatnot. Much more important is the mobilization of those ankles. They're getting plenty of load with running and jumping around if they're an athlete. So it's not really vital to actually load up specific ankle-loaded exercises, but something to consider, okay? Asthma, if someone has an asthma-related problem, well, if they're having breathing issues, one thing that will help them, assuming they're not in a period of high stress right now, not in a period of having heightened sense of asthma-related problems where even minor activity is causing them to have difficulty breathing, well, then clearly they need to rest. They need to make sure they get medical attention if need be, and avoiding any significant exercise is going to exacerbate any breathing problems for the athlete. That said, if they're not currently experiencing problems, we want to start them at the low end of the spectrum, at that 30 to 40% of VO2 max, which is roughly 55 to 65% max heart rate. You can go lower than that, but you're not going to get much benefit there. If you need to go start somewhere lower, then start lower. If you're not sure and you want to be really, really safe, go slightly below that. Go below 55% max heart rate with your cardio type work and below 30% VO2 max. It will not be challenging for them. I can guarantee you that. It's not going to cause anybody to have any breathing problems if they don't have something major going on already. If it does, well, again, you're going to need medical attention. This is way beyond you as a coach if that's the case. What we don't want to have is our athletes who have asthma fearing cardiovascular exercise, because that's the way they're going to get better long term. Not today, but long term. Just like we've seen over the course of this entire class, it's going to take many, many weeks, really preferably 2-3 months or more, probably more like 6 months, 12 months and beyond, where you see significant changes in VO2 max. You can certainly in 2 or 3 months see quite a bit of change, up to 50% change in about 3-4 months for someone who is probably really low level in the first place and has high potential, both. You're not going to see every person increase that much VO2 max. That's unusual. 50% above what they currently have. That's unusual. Probably going to take several months for such a thing to even happen in the first place, regardless of conditioning. The more the elite the athlete, the more conditioned they are now, the lower the percent change, but it can still range in that 5 to 50% VO2 max increase over time, right? But that said, want to be steady state light or intervals light. The intensity of the intervals themselves should not be above these levels when you're starting to get someone going who has asthma or any sort of breathing related or heart related type issues. We start there and see how we do. If they can perform at least 3 successive type sessions at that same level without problems, we should consider increasing the intensity by as much as 10%. Now, it doesn't have to be about 10% exactly, but no more than 10%. Okay? What variable? Well, what makes sense? 10% longer, 10% more intense from a standpoint of force output or a VO2 max, whatever that is. Just because the heart rate is this high doesn't mean we have to get to that heart rate, okay? But hopefully they're performing well when they are in that range. Any athlete with special needs, though, what it really comes back to, requires greater focus on RPE. Scale 1 to 10, how do you feel after every set? The more potential there is for someone having epileptic type seizure or asthma-related problems, some of the issues of female triad, a child, anybody with any sort of special need or problem of high stress right now that's causing them health-related type issues, then we need to have a greater focus on the RPE. Scale 1 to 10, how are you doing? That should be done anyway with all your athletes anyway, and you may have to have more significant conversations about what that really means. A 10 should not be the case all the time. A 10 is during a maximal type exertion and only for brief periods and not all that often. Otherwise, you're not going to get maximal performance. They might feel like they're performing at a 10 as far as their effort goes, but actual output is going to wane. As we talked about, you can't maintain level 10, basically 100% force output that should be ideally consistent with your 10 RPE, can't be maintained for more than a few seconds, and you have to have a full break and then before you can do it again. If you try and do it several days in a row, it's not going to happen. You're going to drop 5, 10, 15% or more for some athletes by trying to push that hard. Be aware of that. Of course, you use the heart rate as a more of an objective tool. RPE is subjective. Heart rate's an objective tool to understand what's going on internally. It's a vital, simple thing for 6 seconds at the end of every exercise. Quickly find the radial pulse, and then they'll do it very quickly at the end of every set. If you haven't already figured this out, I hope you have. every single time you have a drill or set with your athletes now, make sure that you finish that little running drill or a little interval type drill where they're running a series of plays in volleyball or basketball, football, soccer, whatever you're doing. Okay, everybody stop right there. Okay, quickly, what's your RP? Everybody here currently an 8 or higher? Okay, 7. Let's see where they are. Go. I want you to be no lower than a 6 because you got to give me some significant effort here. But if you're a 10, that's too high right now. Should not feel like that. I want you to sit out, or you decide what you're going to do with that. But you got to understand, if they keep saying 10 and they're doing some sort of glycolytic type interval, they're not going to get good performance. Is that what you want? I don't think so. Okay. That said, heart rate wise, we want to have them do that for 6 seconds. They'll give you, it's either somewhere between 6 and 6 would be a 60 heart rate, right? And probably up to like 18 to 20 somewhere in there, which would be unusual for the very first set. Remember, it's going to climb over successive sets. So if they already start at the heart rate was the maximal heart rate you want them to have, because we don't want to set floors for heart rates, we want to set ceilings. Please don't go above blank. Let's get your heart rate above blank. Even though we might say for recovery type workouts, want your heart rate between 55 to 65% max heart rate, we don't say let's get it to 55% necessarily. If they do, so be it. That's not bad or wrong, but to try to get it to that point is not the goal. We want to take account of what their performance is at that particular heart rate, that makes sure that performance keeps getting better at that heart rate. If it doesn't, we drop the heart rate lower. Okay? And of course, we log all that work period, rest period, and intensity information so we have a better understanding of how to adapt our training in the future. Okay? Basic nutritional needs, we kind of referred to it through this course and a couple other sections, but to kind of remind you, it's about 45 to 65% of the diet should be carbohydrate for an athlete, or really any human being, really, generally speaking, except for the care of a dietitian specifically with a medical doctor, both. Otherwise, let's not have someone endangering themselves by trying to do some keto diet or some bulletproof diet, as one of you particularly mentioned about your athletes wanting to go do that stuff. Some of the things in those diets are really good. That's why they're looked at. But the concept of lowering the carbohydrates below 45% really doesn't make any sense for any human being who engages in regular high stress, whether that is mental or physical or any other form of stress. Okay, fat. Now, carbs' primary job is metabolism of other nutrients, as well as fiber for helping motility of your foods and digestive processes. If you don't get the proper carbohydrate, that's a problem, right? And of course, energy for higher intensity activities. Fats, predominant usage of is for energy for lower intensity type activities, but not by much more than carb. Carb is still right there. But really hormonal balance, hormonal support and function, and of course development of the sex hormones, and particularly someone who's trying to get more powerful, strong, fast, any of the above, getting that fat on the higher range might not be a bad idea because your goal is to maximize testosterone if that's the case. And protein's job predominantly is any cellular growth and repair, all cells. So we're talking about muscles, skin, we're talking about the cells within deep down in your body, everything, right? So you got to get proper protein. Who's on the 10% range of protein, the low end? Well, someone engaging in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 calories per day is going to be lower in the percent range because they're not going to need as much total protein, even though they're still going to have quite a bit because they're eating so many calories. Who's going to be higher toward the 35%? Someone who's actually going to be much more towards sedentary, not pulling in more than 12 to 1,800 calories, might be as high as that 35%, all depending upon numerous factors of need for cellular growth and repair. Okay, and of course, as your book will relate, you don't want to have more than about 1.8 grams per kilogram of protein per day for any athlete. Some people have explored the 1 gram per pound of body weight. That's not a proven area. I wouldn't go there if I were you as a coach. Okay, some people have done it very safely and they've been fine, but that's a questionable area. As a coach, I wouldn't recommend it. Okay, and of course, seek help from a specialist as needed. Now, into our final week. Altitude training, which we've talked about before. The predominant benefit of altitude training, or being at altitude really above 6,000 feet, above 6,500 feet, is ideally to increase red blood cells, hemoglobin, to increase the capacity for handling higher levels of work for longer periods, the ability to have higher VO2 max, perform your lactate threshold, being at a higher level. More for people who are trying to engage in activities for several minutes at a time or more. If that's not the case, there's really no reason to be trying to train someone at altitude or live at altitude if it's possible to avoid, because it actually can be possibly strenuous on their ability to train hard if they have difficulty getting to the point where they can train low. There's some research that supports the idea that you can live high and train high and get some benefits from it. But if you really want to maximize the higher intensity type training, you want to be training at low altitudes while you're actually living at high altitudes. Okay, you might be living somewhere where you can get down that mountain an hour, hour and a half, and go have a hard workout or two, and come back up, and at the end of the day, and sleep up there. Because the more time you can spend at altitude, the more benefit you're going to get from that red blood cell count, hemoglobin levels increasing, the ability to capacity to handle greater levels of endurance type work, VO2 max improvement, lactate threshold improvement. But you have to be there at least 21 days or more, which your book didn't really relate so much, to really get any real strong benefits. And within a matter of days, those benefits wane. So it's really only beneficial for your endurance type athletes who are going to be ready to perform very, very close to the time frame which they leave altitude training. Otherwise, it's really just a psychological fun thing to do and really unproven as far as benefit. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. If your athletes seem to get a lot out of it, really enjoy doing it. I know some former track teams that I've been part of that love to do it every single year for a couple weeks. Arguable how much that really helps, but sometimes psychologically it can be helped too. So that's something to be said. Extreme heat versus extreme cold. Extreme heat or cold, well, heat, the warm-up should be shorter, closer to 3 to 5 minute type warm-up. Cold environments, more like 15, 20 minutes or more. Extreme heat, don't want to wear our athletes out, fatigue them. Cold environments can take them longer to get them going, right? And with those extreme heat situations where it gets really hot, there may be a need to increase even more water intake than that 6 to 8 ounces every 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, either whether it's hot or cold, they got to drink more water. There's no question about it. Perhaps plan on making your workout ideally not more than about that 30 to 40% VO2 max to start with. Not much more than that for athletes just getting used to the heat. Remember, it takes at least 7 to 14 days, maybe closer to the 14, to fully acclimate to extreme heat or extreme cold if your athletes are going to need to be performing in that because there's no choice or because a big event's coming up that's going to be in those situations where you want to get them ready for that. You have to take that into account, gradually increase the intensity over that period of time, and don't push them too hard or you're just going to wear them out, which we don't want to do, right? Air pollution issues, breathing related issues. Obviously, the more we can avoid training situations where we have that urban type environment whereby the air pollution is a significant thing, predominantly for our endurance athletes. Once again, it's a greater issue. The more you have to breathe in, the more it becomes a problem for you. Training on less hot days without cool breezes. A light wind can do a lot for clearing the air a little bit. Training near a beach, if you have such choices in urban areas, or near water bodies, because you get the cool air coming off the water, wind blowing through there, much cleaner type air, if at all possible. Paying attention to air quality where possible. Training indoors if you have to try to avoid that a little bit. Do whatever you can to try to minimize those kinds of things. If you're living in Los Angeles or in Chicago or someplace like New York City or in those places, and they're further inland, you're not going to be able to get to better air quality. Do the best you can to avoid by training earlier in the mornings and making your workout sessions a lot less intense on those high pollution type days. Okay, and that said, supplementation is the whole idea of supplements, and taking supplements is something to add to the diet, not replace the diet. We're not trying to replace our body's new food intake with non-food related substances. It's very common for people to try to say, I'm going to skip a meal instead of have a bar. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It just doesn't. I have a meal replacement type shake or a shake for a building mass, a mass building shake as my meal. Not your meal, a snack, or because you're an athlete and engaging in high training, it's hard to eat food, hard solid food every 2 or 3 hours without having gastric distress because you're working out at the same time too. It makes sense to take in liquid type diets or bars, things like that. But please consider those things to be supplements and under close scrutinization from you and possibly a dietitian to make sure they're going to be reasonable, to not spend a lot of money and waste a lot of time and effort when you could be getting just as much out of your food in some cases. But I'm the first one to tell you flat out, if someone eats really well and they add in the proper supplementation, performance can increase dramatically over time, 10, 15, 20% in some cases. Phenomenal amounts can be occurring from a standpoint of aesthetics of body type, like losing fat or taking away some of the excess water you don't want to have for any particular type of performance, but it's required. Certainly increasing muscle mass over time, having supplementation, things like that, increasing endurance can really be helpful. But you got to really be careful with some of that stuff. Really research it well yourself and don't do it if you don't feel like it's worthy. A big one is creatine monohydrate. If your athletes don't want to get bigger at all, don't take this. You're going to get bigger. It's going to take in more water. Your muscles are going to take in more water with creatine monohydrate, which will assist your ability to perform more glycolytically. your book actually refers to helping more creatine phosphate. It's not going to do a lot for performance in that 10-second range. I'm just going to tell you that flat out. It's not. It's going to start helping you. The performance range is about 20 to 60 seconds, like your high intensity intervals. For anybody engaging in exertion levels whereby they're engaging activity for 20 to 60 seconds-ish, give or take, is probably going to see the greatest benefit by taking in creatine monohydrate. That's also the range, about 45 seconds, 60 seconds, 70, 75 seconds, where you get the best benefit towards hypertrophy, which creatine monohydrate also helps. So you're talking about your interval type training and your hypertrophy type focus, someone who's really doing toward lactate type threshold type work, creatine monohydrate can really, really help significantly. Creatine phosphate, going to question that one a lot. People talk about that as being that's what's going to help. Very questionable. It's not going to do a lot for your speed and your power. Okay, it might do some. Sure, it's increasing potential muscle mass, certainly increasing more water hydration to your muscles, but it's going to be questionable how much impact it really has upon power type athletes. Okay, you don't need to load it. 3 to 5 grams a day is very simple to be able to do. You don't have to load it with these incredible 5, 10, 15, 20 grams per day kind of thing for several days. Not necessary. All the research points to the fact that it may not be necessary and probably isn't necessary at all. Just every single day, 3 to 5 grams. If you're not engaging in activity, don't take creatine monohydrate. Okay. And a lot more water is needed. Aerobic performance and blood doping. A lot of people for endurance athletes are taking more EPO, which actually is really like taking out your cells and then regenerating them and helping them get higher red blood cell counts, putting them back into your body, not regenerating them, but basically taking them out, putting them back in, kind of replenishing them, so to speak, and actually coming back like super normal. So all of a sudden it's like you've been living in altitude or something, or training in altitude, and while getting the high intensity and the altitude. And so obviously that's why that's illegal, and it can get tremendous endurance benefits by doing such things. And that's unfortunately very, very rampant, it would seem, in a lot of endurance-related sports. And it can really give a significant aid to athletes and make it harder for athletes who aren't doing that kind of thing to kind of keep up with them, which is why there's so much more of focus in the last few years towards athletes who might be potentially blood doping. And that's what you're hearing about when they refer to blood doping. It's EPO, and it's essentially trying to increase your red blood cell count, hemoglobin levels, so you actually can perform at higher levels for longer periods. Okay, which obviously is not what we want to have our athletes do. We want to improve the natural way. We want to have them improve the natural way because we want our athletes to actually long-term be able to perform, not get fatigued, not get illnesses, not get diseases. Long-term, a lot of things can happen negatively by overdoing things and taking things that will help you in the short term, but it won't necessarily help you long-term at all. Blood buffers can help predominantly with lactate threshold type work, okay, whereby you're trying to you're trying to increase the time toward the lactate threshold, trying to increase the time before you become anaerobic, which actually anaerobic threshold occurs after lactate threshold, right? Be able to perform more moderate intensity, higher intensity type work for longer periods. Blood buffers can actually help with that. Sodium bicarbonate, potassium, taking in some other type supplements that can help that kind of thing. Beta-alanine can also help that kind of thing, okay? But be careful with those things. They also can have some of the side effects of gastric distress, tingling sensation, which, is not going to be life-threatening, but it's going to potentially cause some serious health-related, short-term related challenges, which we don't want to have. But yeah, that can help really a great deal when someone's already eating the proper diet and also training properly. Otherwise, don't even consider such things. Caffeine, well, up to about over 400 milligrams, you still can actually be legal in Olympic level sports. You may want to pay attention to any place where you're training. Some states are going to have different regulations regarding some leagues may have different regulations for what they look at with caffeine in case they test for such things. Someone taking more than 200 to 400 milligrams of caffeine might actually be above those levels required or it's acceptable, and then all of a sudden they're disqualified and potentially may not be suspended from performance, which we don't want to have them have happen to your athletes. Caffeine will help mostly, again, with your endurance type activity and your lactate threshold type level training. Okay, steroids. Now, steroids are what they're really doing is increasing, or really I should say decreasing your recovery time. So you're able to basically engage a lot more stress and have a lot less damage to cells. Steroids can help with that dramatically. It's essentially your fats. When you get proper fats in your diet, you get a steroidal type benefit. That's why you want to have all the good monounsaturated fats that also contain the polyunsaturated fats. Your nuts, your seeds, your oils, natural substances that are not processed, and of course your fish. Salmon in particular is such a great one. Sardines, if you're willing to go down that path as well, and black cod and whatnot as well. But steroids are really a very concentrated portion of fats to a high level, really high level, consequently really important for medical type needs for someone who has severe health-related issues, but unfortunately a lot of athletes take it for purposes of increasing performance. And it can increase performance dramatically with hypertrophy for strength and power-related sports, speed-related sports, very dramatically. And so consequently, that's why a lot of athletes are turning to them. But the downturn is the long-term effect can be dramatic for reducing lifespan. That's not fully proven, but we've seen a lot of athletes who've taken a lot of steroids have a lot of health issues as they get older, which naturally is going to increase more stress and decrease lifespan long-term. Is it really worth it? I'm going to question that. And that said, final thoughts, move into our final week. You're almost there, the last week. 11 weeks can be really tough. Any of these courses, let alone the exercise physiology course, all of your courses in your master's program can potentially be very, very challenging. I appreciate all the efforts you've been making this entire time. If you have any questions ongoing about how to apply the information with your athletes, you have a question or concern about with your volleyball players, your football players, your basketball players, your track athletes, your soccer players, your hockey players, whatever, swimmers, whatever, cyclists and triathletes. I think I pretty much covered what most of you are in baseball, right? All of you are currently coaching right now. Anything on how do I apply this concept? How's it even beneficial to me with my particular players? More than happy to help you in doing that. That's my job, as I said before, to help you become a better coach. I feel best when I know that's happening. Obviously, you want to get an A in the course or a B in the course, make sure you can move on and get your master's degree. But at the end of the day, I think we're all in agreement. We want to be able to help our athletes the best of our ability so we can enjoy what we do, and so can our athletes, and we can all see a great deal of success with limited amount of problems along the way. I wish you all the best. Call me, email me if you have questions about anything going into our final week here with our final exam and our Learn Smarts and our discussion board. Otherwise, I wish you all the best. Best of luck to you in everything you do. Please make sure you fill out the evaluation about the course, and any feedback you have for me, I certainly appreciate. And wish you nothing but the best of not luck, but high-level performance for you as a coach and potentially an athlete down the road. Let me know how I can help you. Take care.